So thank you for that. You changed my sense of overwhelming fear to speak in public into my voice cracking, so that's nice. While this loads and the image comes up on the screen, I'll use the bully pulpit that I have, because you strike while the iron's hot, right? That's what leaders do. And it kind of makes me sad that only half of you raised your hand when they asked whether you thought you were going to be leaders. You have to recognize that you are part of a tiny, tiny global elite that is cosmopolitan, urbane, educated. You speak multiple languages. You travel. You have a passport. You know how many people in the world have that? Very, very, very few. So whatever you decide to do with that, do something great. It can be local, regional, global. Take over the world, but believe in yourself. You gotta fake it till you make it, or even better, fake it till you become it, because you're in a privileged position. We all are. Has it loaded? Can you see it? No. Soon enough, but really try and internalize that message. If I got one thing from going to my university, was that being away from home, from Venezuela, from Colombia, I realized that I am one in very, very large numbers, let's say millions. And I don't say that, I don't mean to say that arrogantly or anything, but become conscious of it and do something great with that. So, without further ado, wait, I want to go back one. I had a great title. Yes, it is a great title. I am here to talk to you about Jewish identity among millennials. In case you didn't know, you are millennials, and we all are. We were all born after 1980 and came into fruition, or our identity did, in the new millennium. So, without further ado, I'll start my presentation. But first, I'd like to introduce myself and a bit about my personal history. Not because I'm self-indulgent, but because I think my Jewish journey is relatable, and I think you'll be able to identify with it. I was born and raised in Venezuela. I lived in the US, moved to Colombia because my father's originally from there, studied in Boston, moved to London, moved back to Boston, back to Colombia, and now Jerusalem is the 9th city that I've lived in. Why I tell you all this is because people often ask me what I most identify with, what place I most feel a part of, or who or what I most feel like. And I find myself answering more and more, I feel Jewish. Now that's strange. On the one hand, yeah, both my parents are Jewish, they had Jewish friends, my siblings went to Jewish school, but me, I never went to Jewish school. My family had to leave Venezuela because of political and kind of ideological persecution. I never went to a Jewish school, Jewish summer camps. I actually was kind of disgusted when I found out that I was going to Brandeis University because it's, well, Jewish. So I started asking myself, why do I feel more and more Jewish, and especially now that I'm in Israel? But before I begin to answer that question, I want you to think back, let's say 50 years. To your grandparents' generation or great-grandparents' generation. This handsome gentleman is Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis and maybe modern social sciences. And as the quote reveals, Judaism wasn't a choice for most of history. Society told you you were Jewish. As Natan Sharansky spoke up here a couple of days ago, based on his last name alone, he was alienated, he was excluded from the rest of society. Think back 50 years in the US or in most other countries, there were Jewish quotas. You wouldn't have been allowed, or very few of you would have been allowed to participate in government, in academic institutions. Harvard, Yale, they all excluded Jews based solely on your last name. It's not that you were Jewish and you had payas and went to shul. It was your last name. That's it. Period. End of story. That all to say that Judaism historically was imposed in many ways by society. If you fast forward to now, millennials, we live in an era of unprecedented freedom and unprecedented prosperity. Jews get a lot of flack for dominating a lot of industries. We don't dominate, but it's completely disproportionate. Think of Hollywood or banking or medicine or law or the Nobel Peace Prizes. We have won 23% of all the Nobel Peace Prizes handed out since it started over 100 years ago. 23%. We're 0.00 something percent of the global population. And yet, in an era of unprecedented freedom and wealth and prosperity, less and less of us feel Jewish, which is a paradox, really. I think it has to do with the fact that there's so much choice out there. We've heard that from several other speakers, including Troy, I think, yesterday morning. There's so much choice that it leads to a kind of cognitive dissonance. As this cartoon, I see no smiles. I guess it's not a good cartoon. As this cartoon exemplifies, there's so many streams of Judaism, and we're connected by Chinese food. There really is no one way to define Judaism. Nonetheless, we try really hard to find out what it is. They do this study in the US every few years called the Pew Study. They spend millions of dollars, door to door, email to email, phone call to phone call, asking Jews what it means to be Jewish. I'll tell you what it is in a second. But by and large, we recognize there's this cultural component and the religious component, but the religious is really quite small. It's 15% of the population in the US, 6-7 million Jews. Only 15% say it's mostly about religion. So, are you ready to find out what Judaism is really about? Yes. There you go. That's it. According to the Pew Study released on October 1st, 2013, this is what it means to be a Jew. Remembering the Holocaust, leading an ethical and moral life, working for justice and equality. Check, 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 check. Right? For most of you, for all of you, for me, certainly it is. But where I want to lead this conversation is the fact that unprecedented prosperity, we can pick and choose whatever we want to be, right? We're millennials, more, it's all about me. And yet, I want you to see where this arrow is pointing to. Of the Jewish population in the US, and I apologize to all of those that aren't from the US. I'm not from the US, but it's a huge population. We got to pay attention to it, right? Of the Jewish population in the US, I want you to pay attention to the Jews of no religion. Those that say that God doesn't exist, they're atheists, they're agnostics. 83% are proud to be Jewish, and yet, look at this arrow, only 42% have a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people. Isn't that amazing? Most people feel proud of it, but they don't feel like they belong. That's like supporting your sports team and then saying you're not a fan. So why does that happen? Why did I feel like Brandeis kind of sucked because it was Jewish? I didn't want to be with other Jews. I didn't belong. I think first it has to do with the paradox of choice that was mentioned a couple of days ago. They did this study in the US in 2005. A Columbia psychology professor, she handed out jam in a supermarket. At first only 6 samples and then 24 samples. And when she handed out 6 samples, 30% of them decided to buy. When she handed out 24, only 3% decided to buy. So it's a paradox in that the more choice we have, the more we feel like we don't really want to make that choice. We're kind of scared by it and overwhelmed, and we think about the opportunity cost, because if there's so much choice, there has to be one that's perfect for me, right? But you never feel perfectly comfortable with your choice. Now, I'm not comparing Judaism to jam, but I think the same principle applies. I want to just end the conversation or my presentation with the fact that I think, and this is my opinion, the fact or the reason behind why so many people feel proud to be Jewish but then don't feel like they belong to the community. Think of your friends that aren't here with you in Israel, or who think that you're weird for being here, or who want nothing to do with their community or their shul or their local JCC or whatever it may be. I think it has to do with the fact that, honestly, we're too judgmental. There's this whole notion that intermarriage will lead to assimilation and the apocalypse, and the Jewish community will be wiped off the face of the earth. But if you see the person next to you, chances are that they came from a marriage that was between two religions, and yet you're here, right? So how are you going to judge the person next to you for that same fact? I just want to end with a couple of cartoons. One way to look at change is to deny it. Let's stem the tide of globalization by banning the internet. We can do that, or we can be a lot more inclusive. So when you go back home, invite people to Shabbat, give them a helping hand, be nice. I know, after many months here, only a handful of Hebrew words, and have only been a handful of times in a synagogue. And yet I feel more Jewish than ever. And you know why? Because Israelis have been so inclusive with me. The number of times that I've been invited, even if I didn't go, has felt like this big warm hug. So go back and give a big warm hug to your local community.